Our today's second speaker is Dr. Bhogtoram Mawroh. Wait. I welcome you, Dr. Bhogtoram Mawroh, for joining us today. Am I audible to you?
Hello. Yes. Yes. Actually, I'm still trying to work my system. Okay, just give me a moment. Just give me a moment. How do I do that? Oh, is it okay? Can you see me?
Yeah. I think that's okay. That's fine.
Okay. Okay. Let me just have a look. Okay, because I'm not really sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Just maybe I should keep it like this.
Yes. That will be much better. Yes.
Okay. Is my video upside down? Because from where I can see it's upside down. Is it upside down?
No. This is perfectly all right. I mean, it should be this way.
Okay. Just a moment. Yeah. Okay.
So
I think because there's a lag out here, so I can't really make out.
Oh.
Okay. So thank you very much.
Oh.
Should I start?
No. I would to give a brief introduction to everyone joining here today about our second speaker, Dr. Bhogtoram Mawroh from Meghalaya. So our second speaker, he's a senior associate research and knowledge management at Northeast Slow Food and Agro Biodiversity Society. So I heartily welcome you and really appreciate you accepting our invitation. So yeah, you may kindly begin with your speech.
Okay, I would like to thank the Mingsel Foundation for actually inviting me to talk. I'm really happy to be here. And just before Mr. Jitendra was here, I think he talked quite a lot on the impact of palm plantation, which I think I don't need to repeat it here. But I would like to talk something about who I am in terms of what I do in my organization, NESPAS, because that will give a context of why palm plantation is going to be bad for Meghalaya. And my name is Bhogtoram Mawroh. I work as a senior associate in research and knowledge management. So in my organization, I'm actually handling the research component. And what our organization does is that it actually is working on indigenous people food system. So what Mr. Jitendra was talking about, the local food system. And so that's what we are working on. And we've been doing a project for the last 3 years, which is on indigenous people food system, how to improve the production, consumption, livelihood, and innovation aspect of it. And then what we did was that 2018, we did a survey, which is called the participatory mapping, where we did a survey of 32 villages in Meghalaya and Nagaland, where we tried to identify the agrobiodiversity that is present in there. Now, what do we mean by agrobiodiversity? Just like you have biodiversity, which is the diversity of living organisms, which is plants, animals, we also have agrobiodiversity, which is the diversity of food items that people consume, which can include plants, animal, insects, any organisms. But then since our project is mostly based on food plants, what we did was that we are trying to work, we did a survey where we tried to find out what is the agrobiodiversity in an individual village in Meghalaya and Nagaland. And what we found was that there are more than 2 food plants in one village in Meghalaya and Nagaland, which means that this is the number of food plants that people are actually using right now and which is present in their area. Out of that, half of it is coming from the forest. Now, why this context is very important, because our argument against palm plantation is based on how it will impact the agrobiodiversity in a very big way, which also will impact the livelihood, which will also impact the land tenure system in Meghalaya, which is the same in Manipur, Nagaland, many tribal areas. And therefore, basically what I would like to say, I would like to talk about is terms of how it will affect the sustainable development goals. Because I think if I do that, be much more systematic from my perspective. So in terms of sustainable development goals, when we look at palm plantation, there are 3 sustainable development goals which are going to be directly affected by palm plantation. Number one is in terms of sustainable SDG number 12, which is responsible consumption and production, which is basically talking about how when you produce something, when you consume something, it should be done in a sustainable manner. Now, what we have seen is that when you talk about in Mizoram, because this is from a work done in Mizoram, is right. So we have 40,000 to 50,000 liters of water per day for 1 hectare of land palm plantation. And because you need a large amount of area for palm plantation to be viable, you need at least 2 hectares. So imagine the amount of water the area consumes. And this is going to be very difficult for a place like Meghalaya, because Meghalaya being hilly area, we have a runoff ratio of more than 60 to 100, which means that more than half of the water rainfall that falls on our land, on our state, it just flows as runoff, which means that we are getting only 30 to 40% of the rainfall as infiltration. Now that is still very, very low. In fact, that's why we have hilly areas are always prone to water crisis. So you have, whether it's Aizawl, whether it's Shillong, you have water problem in these areas. Now, when you bring in palm plantation, and we will have to see which altitude, which elevation they're going to do that also. It's going to be a very big problem on our water resources. It's going to be a very big pressure on that. And then also in terms of soil.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm so sorry to interrupt. People are commenting that your voice is breaking. So would it be okay if you could use a headphone or something?
Okay, let me try.
Yes, please.
Okay, so can you hear me? Is it okay now?
I think so. It's okay. It's okay now. Yes.
Okay, so when I talk in terms of like responsible consumption and production, the impact of water resources is going to be really, really bad. Like, because like I have already said, is that the runoff ratio in Meghalaya is 60 to 100, which means that more than half of the rainfall that falls in Meghalaya is just loss as runoff, which only 30 to 40% is being infiltration. That's why Meghalaya and many hilly areas are actually highly water scarce zones. And therefore, you also talk about soil degradation, because they found that organic carbon is very less in areas where you have palm oil plantation. Now, organic carbon is very important for the soil, and especially like in terms of climate change mitigation as well. We have seen that the role of organic carbon is very, very crucial in that, because then there's the carbon which they hold into the soil. Now, all that impact is going to really affect the SDG number 12, because we have certain targets under it, responsible consumption and production. Now, when you affect the water resources, when you affect the soil resources, it is not going to allow us to achieve our target. That is number 12. Then we also have target number SDG 13, which is in terms of climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Now, I think Jitendra has already talked about it very well in terms of how climate change will be affected. I would just like to add in that when we talk about climate change, the greenhouse gas emission, 20% of greenhouse gas emissions come from deforestation in tropical, subtropical areas. And we are a subtropical zone. And therefore, deforestation happening here will add at least 20% into the present existing emissions we are doing. And then conventional agriculture, which is like industrial monoculture, is going to add another 20%, which has been found all over the world, which means that when we go for palm plantation, which is an industrial monoculture, which is like monocropping, that is again going to add another 20%. So a minimum of 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emission will increase from Meghalaya if we go for palm plantation, just based on the logic of how it is there around the world. And also, when you talk about climate change, you're not talking about mitigation, you also talk about adaptation, because there are certain things which is going to happen, like glaciers are going to melt, ice, and you have sea levels going to rise, which is going to happen. You're going to stop that, because there are some climate change. If you look at the climate change report, which is the summary of the policymakers, there are some effects of climate change which you cannot stop. It will happen. You cannot do anything about it. Now, when you talk about mitigation, there are very few steps, but adaptation is something that we have to do now. And when I think NASPAS had worked with FAO on a white paper on indigenous people food system and resilience, and we found that the very important component which would give resilience to any food system, because we are working in food system, is diversity. Diversity in terms of the land uses, diversity in terms of the crops, the animals that are found in the system. Because if one fails, the other can compensate for that. And also the genetic diversity which is present in all this diversity might have clues for adaptation. For example, you might have, let's say in Manipur, you have many rice varieties. Let's say out of those many rice varieties, there are some rice varieties who have climate change adaptation potential, which can grow, let's say, in less rainfall and more arid condition, which is going to happen. We're going to have more rainfall in some areas. We're going to have more drought in some areas. So that genetic diversity will be lost, and our climate change adaptation potential also be brought down. And therefore, it is so climate change in terms of our SDG goal number 13 is also going to be badly affected by palm oil plantation, because it's just the logic itself is really, really bad. Then you have SDG number 15, which is on life on land. How do you protect life on land? But if you're going to have palm oil plantation in a biodiversity hotspot, you are going to disturb the local ecosystem. You are going to disturb the components within it, whether it's the animals, whether it's the abiotic environment. We talk about the vegetation out there. So how is a monoculture going to replace the rich diversity of life that you find in our biodiversity hotspot? So even SDG number 15 also is going to be badly affected. Now, these are three SDGs where the effect of palm oil plantation is going to be direct. There is no doubt about that, it's going to happen. But what about other SDGs, which are also very crucial? SDG number 1, which is no poverty. So the SDG number 1 is that we should have no poverty, which is multidimensional poverty, which talks into consideration your assets, we talk into consideration your nutrition, your health, and all those. Now, when you talk in terms of Meghalaya, we find that in Meghalaya, 70% of the households have been categorized as being landless. I mean, by the census 2011, 2021 census. 2011 census. I'm sorry about that. But I believe that number is wrong. We have around, I think the number is around 30%, because you have to look at how actually they are actually like asking question, how do you know that there is landlessness? Now, when you have palm oil plantation, now our farmers in Meghalaya, not just Meghalaya, all over the country, all over India, most of the farmers are small and marginal farmers, less than 1 hectare of land, less than 2 hectares of land. Even in Meghalaya, all marginal farmers 1 hectare of land, 2 acres. Now, palm oil plantation requires you to have at least 2 hectares for it to be viable. Now, which means that there's going to be consolidation of land holdings. Now, in an area where you have community property rights, which is being disturbed because of the colonial process, which brought in privatization. So over time, we have been having a very strong privatization because of agriculture also, because government will give some scheme, or that is some perennial crops. So for that, you have to register your land. So common land becomes private. Now, in palm oil plantation, when you have a bigger piece of land, it's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to actually lead to a lot of consolidation, a lot of land alienation among the indigenous community. And that is again going to have your increase of poverty. Because poverty is not just about money, it's also access to resources, access to assets. All those assets are going to go. And in any environment, whether it's in India, whether it's everywhere, land is the most important asset. So that's going to have a big impact on our poverty target as well. Then you have in terms of zero hunger. Now, maybe people are not dying of hunger, but there's also undernutrition, which means that your body is actually not getting all the nutrients that it requires. And basically, mostly this is in terms of your micronutrients. Now, what we found in Meghalaya is that I think this is a Niti Aayog report which came out recently, where Meghalaya did very badly. In fact, Meghalaya was second last from the bottom in terms of ranking, and then it was Nagaland. Now, in that report, we found that in terms of malnutrition, Meghalaya had done very, very badly. I'll give you some figures. In terms of underweight children, Meghalaya had around 20 to 30% of children being underweight. Then in terms of stunting, Meghalaya had around more than 30% of children being stunted. In terms of anemic women, 30 to 60% of them anemic women. Then you have in terms of anemic children, 30 to 60% again. So what you can see is that we already have a problem under nutrition. So we have calories, but we don't have micronutrients. Now that can be rectified by looking at agrobiodiversity. In fact, we did a study for FAO again, in June, where we did a study. We use this food household insecurity scale. And we found that when it talks of household food insecurity over the last 1 year, we found that in Meghalaya and Nagaland, the number of households who actually were food insecure, severe and moderate, they were at 12%. But in South Asia, it was more than 40%. And why? Because for this study, we did those households who had very strong indigenous people food system, like Jum cultivation. What we found is that, and FAO also appreciated, is that, you know what, you look at this food system is actually very resilient. In fact, we were working on a book with FAO, and this book was Indigenous People Food System in Resilience to Climate Change. This book recently won the 2021 World Sustainability Award, which is like a Nobel Prize for Sustainability in terms of book. So it's now in the Hall of Fame, in the Halbor, the Nobel Museum. So that book actually showed that if you look in terms of resilience, there are 13 indicators of resilience in terms of climate change. These are called as sharp indicators. Now, out of the 13 indicators, the Khasi food system in Meghalaya, in Nongtra, was found to be resilient in 10 out of 3. 3 were there, but this is contextual. I'll explain to you later, maybe a little bit about that. But you see, the indigenous people food system has the capacity to actually bring about strong nutrition. But then if we lose that, Why we lose it? Because when say palm oil plantation, half of that food, plant especially, is coming from the forest. If the forests are gone, where will it come from? And then also you have animal food, you have insects, you have the whole like ecosystem services which this environment is providing. All that will be lost. And undernutrition will become a problem. In fact, the Niti Aayog report 2018 on June cultivation has already made it very clear that whenever you have plantation, when you're trying to remove June cultivation, bringing in these new policies, food insecurity increases. That is the Niti Aayog telling you, not me, not anybody who might be biased, but it's the government of India, the planning body, which is telling you. Food insecurity increases when you remove June cultivation and bring in plantation. And palm oil plantation is a plant. Palm oil cultivation is a plantation. And the lastly, and most important, is also reduce inequalities. Now, you can have a lot of income, you can have a lot of high GDP, but you need also to bring inequality, the Gini coefficient. Now, important asset in our tribal areas, indigenous areas in Manipur, in Nagaland, Meghalaya, Arunachal, Mizoram, we have land. Now, when you are going to increase landlessness, that will increase inequality. In fact, tribal elites are coming up. These are zamindar who have huge amount of land. Now, this is going to increase because they're going to lead to concentration of land holding. Our land tenure system is going to be badly affected. And also women in the case very, very important because there is also gender inequality. Now, what we have found, I think the Mizoram study also showed that, in fact, if you study in terms of how does commercial crop plantation bring, impact women role, you find that the role of women decreases when there is a crop plantation because the men used to keep all the money. If you talk in terms of food security, women are more concerned about food security, providing food for the family, looking after everybody. Men are more concerned in terms of income. Even in Meghalaya also, we have been saying that, the moment you have cash crop cultivation, women's role go down. Women's importance go down, even in our matriarchal society. So when you look at palm oil plantation, it is not just going to impact the environment. It's going to impact the whole society. It's going to bring out more inequality because I think Jitendra has already said that you have 3 lakh hectares. But if you look in terms of the Indian Palm Oil Institute, what they have said is that there are 20 lakh hectares potential area in India. 10 lakh hectares are in Northeast India. It's a big number. And is it a big number? Because if you look in terms of Meghalaya area, we are 22 lakh hectares. 10 lakh hectares, it's a big area. Even 2 lakh hectares is a big area. Because when you talk about in terms of wasteland, I mean, when you look at wasteland definition, you look at cultivable fallow areas, like Jhum fallow are being considered as being wasteland. But there are studies already showing that Jhum areas, they are fallow areas. They also give a lot of food plants. They attract a lot of diversity in terms of animals, and also in Thailand especially. The fallow areas are being used to rear bee. And the bee from fallow area, the honey from fallow area is supposed to be very good. So I think palm oil plantation, and then when you talk about now 3 lakh, and then because there are 10 lakh is the potential, what are you going to do when nobody says anything, you're going to increase to 10 lakhs, so the impact is going to be really, really big. And I think we should be really aware of that. I think Mr. Jitendra has already talked about many issues. I wouldn't like to go into that again, but I think from my side, when you talk about the SDG goals, we have certain goals, certain commitments. So palm oil plantation is going to affect all of that, but forget the SDG goals. It's going to be havoc to our life because now maybe small area, then you have more bigger, and we don't have to go very far because we have to look at what happened in Indonesia and Malaysia. In fact, the European Union had banned palm oil products into Europe. There must be a logic to that. I think we should. So in my opinion is that palm oil plantation is going to be a big problem for our region, our food security, our land tenure system, our climate change, in terms of inequality. So I think this is we should try to make sure that this should not happen. That the bad impacts of palm plantation should be contained or stopped before it even starts, because they haven't started. It could, but then we have to be very careful about that. Thank you.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
sorry, I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge regarding, how it might affect our indigenous land and all that. So I think if anyone wants to ask any questions.
I'm sorry if somebody did not get what I said because it was my voice was not clear. I can repeat again, no problem.
Yeah. So here is one question. Cecil Thanajam is asking, what is your opinion on sustainable palm oil?
See, when you talk about sustainable palm oil, what are you talking about? Are you talking about in terms of how does palm oil become sustainable? It's an industrial monoculture. It's a monocropping system. And monocropping system, they're not sustainable because you have one certain crop which can fail any time. And then for this one, you need to have a lot of pesticides, a lot of weedicide, a lot of herbicide. Why? Because it's a monoculture. And every monoculture weed is going to be a big problem. And when you have that, because see, if you're going to say, okay, we will do palm plantation in places where there is nothing going, nothing is happening. Maybe they're doing some greenery, but then even then also you have to look at that ecosystem. What is happening with that? So if you're going to change the ecosystem, you're going to change the ecosystem services, the provisioning services, it's not going to be sustainable. And in terms of soil fertility, if the soil fertility is going to go down, how is it sustainable? If the water resource is going to be affected, how is it sustainable? So sustainability, and if the surrounding environment because of the chemical pesticides, and we have to remember that when you talk about environmental movement, it was in 1962 when Rachel Carson wrote the book The Silent Spring, which began the environmental movement. What was she talking about? She was talking about in terms of how these chemical pesticides, which is the byproduct of the Second World War surplus chemicals lying around, actually created a lot of problems for human health, for health of the biodiversity. So there is no sustainability. I mean, there cannot be sustainability in that.
So thank you so much for answering the question. And yeah, I would also agree to that. But yeah, it's there. Also, regarding the question of sustainability. When say for example, okay, if this mode of cultivation, has to happen in our place or any other place, then it's for Northeast India, it's most likely. I mean, of course, it is going to affect the indigenous people, and then their lands, and even their cultures and everything. But even the question of what is the alternative, if this particular plantation is to happen, if the land is to be confiscated and taken for this plantation, so what are the alternative of sustainable living that the government has actually planned for the people? So even to that questions, there is no answer. So we do not really see any positive impact from this mode of plantation.
See, another point about sustainability when you talk about in terms of income. For example, you say, okay, we're going to get income, we're going to be better off. But as the report from Mizoram, I think, has found out, is that what, they are not getting paid. How is it sustainable? And also, you are destroying your asset, the only asset you have, land, which is going to be useful for you for generation. So if you're going to destroy that, your economic sustainability also comes down, because then you talk about ecosystem services provision. So if, for example, let's say, how do you do the accounting for that? Okay, 1 hectare of land, or let's say one hill, for example, no, it can, because it's giving you soil protection, because it's giving you water, water filtration, and all those. If you take that all into consideration, you count, you put a value to that, it's going to be hundreds and thousands of dollars just to bring back, if you want to go back to regeneration to that. So in terms of even income sustainability, economic sustainability also is not sustainable, because you're going to destroy the asset which is there, and all your production, all your livelihood will depend on the asset. If you don't have the asset anymore, it's highly degraded. If you want to bring it back to the original condition, it's going to cost you a lot. And so economically also it's not sustainable.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to ask questions, we still have time. So while we wait for questions from the people, I will also want to, want you to elaborate on how this mode of plantation is going to affect women in particular.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, how this oil palm plantation, if it gets implemented, how is it going to affect women in particular? That's my question.
Okay. Okay, see, the thing is that we already have seen is that in Mizoram, because women have a very important role to play in our local food system. But when you are going to destroy the forest for commercial plantation, first of all, the woman knowledge, which is about agriculture, which is about the forest, gets lost. And with that loss of knowledge, that loss of autonomy also gets lost, because you know what, knowledge is also an asset. Now, what we also have seen is that whenever you bring in cash cropping, women's role goes down, because then what happens? Men are the one who actually take all the money. Now, we also talk about in terms of increasing workload for the women in Mizoram, which has already happened. There's a story on that by Purvi. I think, I'm so sorry, I don't remember the name right now. But in Meghalaya also, what we have seen is that even though we are a matriarchal society, once we see that there is ginger plantation, there is broom plantation, there are all these cash cropping coming in, women's role actually goes down, because the men are the one who will handle the money, especially when it comes to cash. So therefore, this is the problem. So women's role is going to go down, even though we are matriarchal. The control will go to the man, because even though we are matriarchal, we see that in terms of politics, women are still marginalized in traditional polity. Of course, in the formal political organization, women are there, but they're very less. Now, what they have is that, and also you have to look in terms of what is happening in agriculture is called the feminization of labor. If you look at the labor in agriculture in India, more than half are women. Why is it that? Because men are going somewhere else, because they don't want to produce food, they want to earn money. So they leave women behind for that. And now all the burdens coming on the women. Now you're going to take away that also from the woman. You're going to take away her asset, her knowledge also from the woman. Then there'll be nothing left with women. So I think it's indirectly also, maybe we don't consider it so much. And also in terms of land rights in Meghalaya, because the more landlessness happens, the more private property happens. Because see, women get property when you talk about traditional ownership. The youngest daughter gets traditional property. But when you talk about the self-acquired property which you buy on your own, that can go to anybody, not just to the woman. And what will happen is that will also lead to a concentration of land in the hand of men, because they already are controlling our traditional polity. It's our Darbar Shnong, or when they talk about our district council, they're mostly men. So when you have more of commercial, more of money economy, money logic coming in, the role of women, which is not about money, which is about food, which is about health, which is about the family, will take a big blow, and that will again lead to disempowerment of women, especially in our area also, because we have some empowerment in the Northeast, where women are much more, I would say, respected, but that will also suffer a lot, because it's the whole logic. Because once you do that, then you do something else, you bring in more plantation, more other crops, more cash cropping, and that will have a big impact.
Thank you. Here is also one question by Decolonial Indigenous Memes. Do you think oil palm cultivation will affect the socio-economic scenario of Northeast? Because the government propagates that oil palm will enhance the socio-economic development of the region. So can you please elaborate on this?
Yes. See, when you talk about socio-economic development, you're talking about what are the indicators for that? You're talking about road, you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about assets, you're talking about income. But like I've already mentioned, is that when the only asset we have here is our land. When we lose that, when that is being degraded, when that is being contaminated, when we don't have that, in the long run, we are going to suffer. And also, when you talk in terms of cash cropping, you're going to have a tribal elite, in our case, tribal elite come into the picture, who will then take all the profits, which is already happening here, because land is being concentrated. We have big certain families, certain clans who are holding so much land. In fact, the whole of Shillong belongs to a certain clan. So you already have this concentration of resources happening. Now, when you talk about that, you may have, when you talk in GDP, wow, palm oil plantation is happening. There is so much GDP because the value of palm oil plantation is this much. The GDP has gone up. But you also talk in terms of how is it distributed. And that is a big problem, because America is the richest country in the world, but you have hungry children, you have homeless people. Why is that? Because the inequality is very, very high. Therefore, in America, when you had Bernie Sanders coming out and saying, we will fight against the 1%. Who are the 1%? Who are the elite? The Jeff Bezos, you have like Elon Musk, you have all these kind of people, you have Microsoft. So there's a lot of inequality going there. And therefore, somebody like Trump came into the picture. Now, we can already see what does only focus on GDP. Even if you're taking, social in terms of what GDP, that is not a solution, because what happened in America when had those January 6th or February 6th when they had right in America, what was that? There was people saying, no, we are enough of the GDP, there is inequality, we are suffering, all of us, and therefore you have this big problem. Now, here, because our access to land is still there, if we may have access in terms of I own it, but my land is already degraded, I cannot use it anymore. So the development you're talking about, and development is not just about economics, it's also social, it's also cultural, because it's about development, it's about opportunities. Now, when you lose your asset, what is opportunity will left for you in the future? We have to be very careful and look at certain examples from elsewhere. In fact, America is a very good example. We have to look there what happens when you don't think about equality, don't think about everyone, when you think about there certain few people. And I mean, the logic, if you see, the pound condition is about the logic. What is the logic? You're talking the logic in terms of cash, 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 GDP, 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 value, 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 economic value. But that's going to be very different. But that's going to be a problem. We've already seen that. I think, and therefore, and then you have cash cropping, which has been depend on the market. It'll depend on the market fluctuations up and down. We have the market cycle, it's going up and down. We have the boom, the bust, the reach, and then you have recovery, which is a very painful recovery. We had 2012 economic crisis. So we are going to be tied to that logic of market logic. And that's going to be very dangerous for our society.
Thank you so much. There is also one question by Pristine Dream. It says, could you please give a brief on how or what is the response from those indigenous communities who are directly or indirectly involved in it?
See, for us, for example, here we have not really started. You know, we are. I mean, it hasn't started. But the Conrad Sangma government has said, you know, we are going to take everybody on board, and then we are going to start it. So we don't know what's happening. So till now, we have no new announcement. But they may be already signing MOU. We really don't know what they are doing out there. So as long as we don't see a big thing happening, till now our response has been no, we don't want it. That's the intelligentsia talking about it. Our student body is saying no to that because you know what, like we know what happened in Indonesia to the indigenous people, the Dayak people, Kalimantan Borno area. We know what happened to the Orang people, the Asli Orang people in Malaysia, their area. So it is going. So I mean, the thing is that right now here we are just quiet, but we have made our voice heard. Even Bindo Lanong, who was from UDP, the coalition partner, the very important coalition partners, also said, no, we should think about it. Then we have other politicians like RJ Lindo, who's trying to make a comeback in Congress party, very seasoned politician. His sister is, I think she is like Amprin Lindo, our present MLA from Laimukra. They also have talked about it. This is not really good. So there is resistance, but because nothing has been seen on the ground, we have not seen any land being converted to palm plantation. So we're just keeping a close watch on that. And then when we see that they are going forwards in terms of trying to sign MOUs, trying to bring in the corporate, like you have your Patanjali, you have your Ruchi, so I mean all those, then we will intensify our struggle. So right now what is happening here also, when you have called me here, I have seen a very good opportunity to connect with you, because then it's going to happen all over the Northeast. So that way we can build more connection, we can build a network, and then maybe when the time comes, we can actually try to, you know, like build a movement together, because when we do it together, there's more chance of success. It cannot be disaggregated into all the states. It has to be aggregated.
True. Thank you so much. So here is again another question. It's a very interesting question by Gemutia, I don't know how to pronounce it, but okay. So can palm oil cultivation be seen as following the pattern of Green Revolution? Additionally, by encouraging self-reliance and individualism, will it aggravate conflict and violence?
See, when we talk about Green Revolution happened because India was facing a food crisis or shortage. 1970s, because there was drought. 1960s, there was a big drought. So India actually, there were some years when you had excess, then there were some years when you had shortage, and therefore India was actually importing a lot of food grains, especially wheat from USA. You know, like, and therefore we had Green Revolution. The Green Revolution did help in solving our food surplus problem, food deficit problem. But also at the same time, over the years, what we have seen is that there's a lot of environmental impacts. In fact, people have said that, you know, Green Revolution also only benefits the large farmers. But we have 2/3 of our farmers are small and marginal farmers. It's going to be very, very difficult for us. So when we talk about Green Revolution, it's about industrial farming system. Palm plantation is also industrial farming, because we talk about monoculture here. So the whole logic is about industrial farming. And you talk about individualism, and you talk about that is more neoliberal. It's neoliberal attitude, and I think it's very, very interesting to see that 1970s was a time when neoliberalism became a dominant ideology in terms of economic ideology, or first in UK, US, and then spread around the world. And then that's when you had this Green Revolution coming in also. So I'm not really sure the freedom part into how is it linked, but you talk in terms of the whole superstructure, we talk in terms of the whole economic structure under which Green Revolution happened, which is neoliberalism. I think yes, there can be a link there, but we have to dwell more deeper into that, because I thought about that, but I think there could be a link there.
Thank you for addressing the question. So here is also one more question by Yellow Flower Poetry. It says, can you explain about the farmers' buyback policy that Patanjali plans with this endeavor?
See, I'm not really very much aware of that. I'm really sorry about that. I'm not really very much aware in the detail about that.
It's fine. So, if anyone wants to ask more questions, it's still open. We still have time. If anyone wants to ask questions, please do. To have in mind.
I think I would like to just tackle in terms of the whole, like, I think they talked about a little bit about the climate change, that because we're more green, we're more climate. I mean, the whole point is that, like, the area you're talking about in terms of Meghalaya as well. So what areas are you going to do palm plantation? You have to look at the altitude. Now, I can agree, if you're talking about wasteland, I would say maybe in Meghalaya, if you come to Meghalaya, central part of Meghalaya, the central Khasi, the Khasi Hill, East Khasi, West Khasi, those like more than 1400 meters above, those areas you can see in some way they are degraded. Because you have to look at the historical, what happened in the history about that. But palm plantations are going to happen there because it is too cold. You need some warmer climate. So they're going to happen in Garo Hills, maybe in Ribhoi, those kind of areas, because they're going to be made closer to the market as well. Because you really don't know where it's going to happen. But those areas, you don't have any wasteland. And even if they were saying, Conrad Sangma was saying, like we are going to do in only those areas where they're already growing something. Now, when we talk about even rice cultivation, the paddy cultivation, I think the same as being Manipur as well. People don't grow just one variety of paddy. They have many varieties of paddy. And you also have pisciculture. You catch fish from the paddy field. And then you have wild vegetables growing along the side. And then maybe in the fallow period, you also grow some vegetables. So, you are going to replace this very rich, diverse food system with a system which is based on monoculture. Is going to reduce the fertility of the soil. You're going to water table is going to be badly affected because of the pesticides, the herbicides, the weedicide, all these chemicals. The entire ecology is going to be affected. So I mean, the whole thing about climate change. I mean, you're talking about this green, but it's not just about green. I mean, you also need to look at the species out there because it's an exotic species. I mean, and then you have to look at the soil because soil is the largest reservoir of carbon. If you're going to soil is going to degrade, and like in found in Mizoram where the soil carbon, organic soil carbon has been going down, it means that you are more it's like emission is going to happen, there's no sequestration going on. So the whole thing about climate change has to be really questioned about it because it's based on faulty logic. All forest is not, I mean, like just woodland is not a forest actually.
Yeah, true. So regarding the question of how this particular mode of plantation, I mean oil palm plantation, being quite economic and sustainable is very doubtful. Yeah, I mean you have already mentioned about it. So I mean, say let's see. A particular, say if we have to start with a plantation, in order to harvest it, it will take more like a minimum of 5 years, 4 to 5 years. So the land remains unused and useless for those for that many years. When in the traditional mode of cultivation, we would be using it for many other purposes. So in that manner also, the sustainability or the productivity of this particular mode of cultivation is highly questionable. Yeah, and also
yes, exactly.
Yeah, please.
Exactly. Like for example, let's say talk about the gestation period, because now the government is saying they're going to help the farmers, they're going to give them money to tide over the gestation period, and they're going to give a fixed price. They're going to help with all of that. So the whole point is that when the farmers in India are protesting for Gender 3 farm laws, they're asking for MSP, minimum support price, to be actually made legal. You are giving this support. So this is the comment I got from a person from the mainland. We're talking about in terms of how the farmers in the mainland, they're saying, this is what we want for us. We want minimum support price. We want to support our agriculture, but you're not giving it to us. You're giving it to palm oil plantation. So she told me that there is a kind of, I think it's a bias towards us. And I said, no, we are also, we are not going to get anything out of it, because in Mizoram, we already have seen that they are reneging on the promise, they're not buying, so, I mean, the whole idea is that they're going to, I mean, all the money which they're talking about in terms of supporting the farmers will not come. And even after you do it also after 5 years, because in Mizoram, like what I read in the report is that people are uprooting the trees, but this is again very difficult to do that, and planting erica nut and other things, because this are much more feasible for them. So in terms of like, I think it's going to be a big problem.
Yes. So I think if there is no more questions, I think we can also end the session here. So, okay, I think here is one question by, Pristine. Since the role of the woman is already been mentioned, but comparatively, who are more concerned about it, either men or women? In general, whose resistance or acceptance is acknowledged more?
See, I think resistance of the common people. I mean, it cannot be man and woman, because, I mean, of course, there is a gender division in that. I mean, but when you're resisting as a community. For us, we're looking in terms of our indigenous community. I mean, I'm considering in that aspect. Of course, there is this whole gender thing where, like you have differentiation within the community as well. But right now, yes, this is going to be a massive impact, especially in the role of women in Meghalaya. That's what I'm hypothesizing, because based on what has happened elsewhere. But when we fight against this, we have to fight as a community, as an indigenous community, as a community from Northeast India who've been marginalized for such a long time. Even in this case, like I think Mr. Jitendra has already talked about, there has been no impact assessment, there has been no consultation with the local community. Of course, you talk to your Manipur, you talk to your government, who is a BJP government. Of course, they did not say no to that. In Meghalaya, we have the Conrad Sama government, which is NPP, and who actually voted for CAA. When we said we don't want CAA in the parliament, they went and voted for CAA. So how can we expect anything from them? So you can't talk to them. You have to talk to the local people on the ground. And so when we resist against that, we'll have to resist as a community.
Also, the very question, of women, why women, in this, is that as we all know, like in having to live in a patriarchal society most of the time, and like it is very common, like it's already visible everywhere that women always are at the lower strata, when it comes to work and everything. So being being at the receiving ends, for all this time. So the question of what, how is this particular oil palm cultivation going to benefit women too is also quite crucial. So yeah, I think that is also the reason why we also should consider on that perspective also. I mean, of course, when we are, when we have to voice up, as an indigenous community, we have to do that. But, why also we cannot ignore the, question of women here is that it leads to more marginalization of women. If it's going to, if it leads to marginalization of, women, then, it still is, also problematic on that basis again. So like overall, how, even if it's going to benefit, one section of the gender, then, we should also be questioning that. So that's where the question of, women arises.
No, I completely agree with that. Because I've already informed that, that because palm plantation will have a big impact on women because of feminization of labor, agriculture, which is already happening. We have movement out there when it affects agriculture, when it affects the food security, especially the women who actually are more concerned about food security. So affecting women will be much more, let's say, magnified because of that. That is for sure, I think. But when we stand as a voice to protest against that, I think in terms of, let's say, practicality aspect, we have to also subsume all that voice, just and come out as an indigenous people, as like people from the Northeast region. I mean, but the impact of women has to be acknowledged. That can be one of the points in which you can push forward and say, you know what, apart from the environment, apart from the economy, apart from the agriculture, women also are going to be marginalized by this logic. Not just forget the area, it's the whole logic which is the problem here.
Agreed. So I think there is also one last question. So it says, is Erica plantation as harmful as oil palm?
No, this is where it becomes very interesting, because the Erica plantation is actually a very old form of plantation cash cropping in Meghalaya, which is happening in the southern slope of Meghalaya. You have the Rewar area. That's where I am from. But when you look at this Erica plantation, it is not a monoculture. In Erica nut plantation, especially when you have home garden, you are growing a pineapple, you are growing bay leaf, you are getting many wild edibles, and then so these are not exactly completely monoculture. So we can in palm plantation is going to be monoculture, and then also in Erica nut plantation, yes, if it's completely monoculture, it is going to impact. It is going to impact. There's no doubt about that. But the system of plantation, which is there in indigenous, in local, in tribal areas, indigenous areas, it is entirely about diversity. Even in Erica nut plantation, also, if you go there, you'll see there's diversity. In fact, my own family, we have an Erica nut plantation in Nongjiri, this border between Meghalaya and Bangladesh. It's not just Erica, because one of the important sources is not just Erica. It's also your bay leaf, which is also growing within the Erica nut plantation. Then you also have jackfruit from there. You also getting jackfruit from there. In fact, what my late uncle would say is that if you have jackfruit, it helps to regenerate the soil. It helps to bring the soil back to fertility. So it is not a complete monoculture, Erica nut plantation. But of course, if it is just monoculture, it will have an impact. There's no doubt about it. But the logic has been that we are looking at diversity. Till now, we are doing that in terms of we are working within diversity, and so therefore, I would say palm oil is a bigger evil.
Yeah, thank you so much for addressing the question. And so we are open to one more question. If anyone wants to come in. Otherwise, we can wind up with this. Well, I think there are no more questions. So yeah. So thank you so much, Bhogtoram Mawroh, for joining in today and sharing us your knowledge, which is very important, and also enlightening us regarding how is it in Meghalaya, and regarding the kind of food diversity and all that we must take into consideration if we are going to go through this, whether to go about it or not, and all this. So thank you very much for joining in today. Yeah. Okay, then we can end here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.